What happens when an ordinary flight turns into a headline-making incident? For Barron Trump, a routine trip was about to spiral into chaos. But no one could have anticipated the storm that followed. The final boarding call echoed through the busy terminal of Dallas Love Field Airport, the voice crackling over the loudspeaker. The steady hum of travelers filled the air, rushed footsteps, rolling suitcases, distant chatter blending into an ever-present noise. Gate agents moved efficiently behind their counters, calling out seat assignments and answering last-minute questions from passengers eager to board their flights. Near Gate C-12, a 17-year-old Barron Trump sat quietly, his tall frame folded into a chair that seemed almost too small for him. His long legs stretched forward slightly, crossed at the ankles. His posture was relaxed but closed off, his head tilted downward as he scrolled through his phone. If anyone had glanced at him in passing, they might not have even recognized him. Dressed in a simple black hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers, he didn't stand out in the sea of travelers, just another teenager lost in his screen, minding his own business. But despite his casual appearance, there was an air of quiet self-assurance about him. Barron had grown up in the public eye, yet he had mastered the art of staying under the radar when he wanted to. While the world might see him as the son of a former president, he saw himself as just another passenger, waiting for his flight. Today, however, that illusion of normalcy was about to be shattered. Across the terminal, a gate agent, a man in his late 50s, with sharp features and an air of impatience, was surveying the priority boarding section. His uniform was neatly pressed, but there was a stiffness to his posture, a rigid sense of authority that he carried with him. His gaze swept over the passengers waiting in the designated area. Businessmen in tailored suits. A mother adjusting her child's backpack. A couple holding hands, deep in conversation. And then, his eyes landed on Barron. Something about the teenager caught his attention. Maybe it was his aloof demeanor. Maybe it was the way he seemed unconcerned, his focus entirely on his phone, while the rest of the passengers around him looked eager, impatient, ready to board. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something deeper. Either way, the agent's expression hardened. He stepped forward, his shoes clicking against the polished floor as he approached the young man. His presence cast a sudden shadow over Barron's quiet space. Then his voice cut through the background noise. "Excuse me, young man." The tone was not polite. It wasn't the typical customer service voice one might expect from an airline employee addressing, a passenger. There was something in it, a layer of suspicion, a hint of challenge. Barron looked up, caught off guard but composed. His striking features, a blend of his mother's poise and his father's presence, remained unreadable. He wasn't rattled, at least not yet. "Yes?" he responded, his voice even, respectful. The agent didn't ease up. "Are you sure you're in the right boarding group?" The question hung in the air, its implication clear. Around them, the sounds of the terminal continued. A baby crying in the distance, the ding of an incoming flight announcement. But an invisible tension had begun to form in this small pocket of space. A few nearby passengers glanced over, sensing the shift in energy. Barron, still calm, straightened slightly in his seat. He had been through situations like this before, but this felt different. His answer was firm but polite. "Yes, I am. I have a first-class ticket." For a moment, the gate agent simply stared at him, His gaze flickered, moving from Barron's phone to his hoodie to his sneakers, as if trying to piece together an image that didn't fit his expectations. Then came the next request. "Can I see your ticket?" The words weren't shocking, but the way they were said, clipped, demanding, made them land differently. Barron hesitated. It wasn't the first time he'd been singled out for no apparent reason. But this time, something felt off. He could sense it in the way the agent stood, the way his eyes lingered a little too long, searching for something: doubt, discomfort, guilt, something that wasn't there. Still, Barron didn't argue. He didn't roll his eyes or push back. Instead, he simply reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his boarding pass glowing on the screen. Without a word, he handed it over. The agent took it, his eyes scanning the name displayed, Barron Trump. And then he paused. A beat of silence passed. His expression shifted. It was subtle, but it was there, a flicker of realization. But instead of stepping back, instead of apologizing or moving on, his demeanor hardened even further. He wasn't letting this go. Passengers around them had started to take notice. It wasn't uncommon for airlines to check tickets. But something about this exchange felt different. There was a quiet discomfort spreading through the air like static before a storm. Barron felt the heat of their eyes on him, the weight of their curiosity pressing in from all sides. Still, he kept his expression neutral. He had learned long ago that reacting, even when it was justified, only made things worse. The agent, however, seemed determined to turn this moment into something more. He cleared his throat, shifting his stance. "Wait here." The two words felt heavier than they should have. Barron's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. He simply watched as the agent turned and walked off, disappearing behind the counter with his phone in hand. And just like that, the whispers began. A low murmur of voices, hushed but urgent, rippled through the nearby passengers. People exchanged looks. A few pulled out their own phones, discreetly recording from a distance. Others simply watched, their expressions ranging from confusion to quiet disapproval. Barron felt his pulse steady but strong. This wasn't just about a ticket. This was about something else. Something unspoken, but undeniable. And whatever it was far from over. The gate agent's expression shifted. But instead of easing up, instead of acknowledging that he might have made a mistake, his stance grew even more rigid. There was no backing down now. Not for him, and not for Barron. "Wait here." Two words. Sharp. Final. Barron felt the moment drag out, the agent turning briskly, disappearing behind the counter. The air around him thickened. Passengers nearby paused, their hushed conversations replaced by something different now. A low, buzzing hum of curiosity. Eyes darted toward him. Some subtle, others blatant. Barron felt his heartbeat in his ears, though his face remained neutral. Years in the public eye had trained him well. No emotion. No reaction. Just wait. Still, a faint heat crept up his neck. Not anger. Not yet. But something close. He could feel the energy shifting around him. And then, the agent returned. This time, he wasn't alone. A second man, older, taller, with a heavier presence, walked beside him. His supervisor. The pair stopped in front of Barron, blocking his view of the boarding gate. The agent squared his shoulders before speaking. "There seems to be an issue with your ticket." His voice was firm, a little too firm. "You'll need to step aside while we sort this out." Barron's brows pulled together in a brief frown. "What issue?" His tone was measured, but the edge of frustration was there. "I booked this ticket weeks ago." No hesitation, no uncertainty, because he knew there was no issue, and yet the agent didn't falter. The supervisor spoke up now, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "We're handling it, sir. Please step away from the gate." The "sir" was a courtesy, but the message was clear. This isn't a request. Barron's fingers tightened around his phone, but he said nothing. With a slow breath, he stepped aside, not because he believed this was necessary, but because he knew how this game was played. Still, the shift in the atmosphere was undeniable. As soon as he moved, a ripple went through the crowd. Phones appeared. A woman in a business suit, pretending to check her messages, but her camera lens was angled directly at him. A man holding his phone at chest level, screen dimmed but still recording, and then the whispers. Not just quiet murmurs now, actual conversations. "Wait, is that Barron Trump? Why are they stopping him? Did he do something?" The weight of every stare, every hushed word, settled over him, and he hated it. But this wasn't the time to react. Not yet. Leaning against a nearby column, Barron watched as other passengers continued to board without issue. The elderly couple, the young mother with her toddler, the businessman checking emails as he walked through the gate without a second glance from the staff. No delays, no second looks, just him. He shifted his weight, crossing his arms, his eyes flicking toward the gate agents still murmuring amongst themselves. What was taking so long? His mind ticked through the possibilities. Maybe there was a glitch in the system. Maybe his name had triggered some kind of flag, an extra security measure tied to his family. Or maybe this was something else entirely. Barron wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but this was beginning to feel personal. He'd been in the spotlight long enough to recognize when he was being singled out, and he wasn't the only one who had noticed. Nearby, a man in a Yankees cap shook his head, muttering to his wife, "This is ridiculous. Just let the kid board." A woman in a gray coat sighed audibly, crossing her arms. The tension was no longer just Barron's to bear. The crowd had started to feel it too. And then, finally, the supervisor returned. But one look at his face told Barron exactly what was coming next. The situation wasn't about to improve. The supervisor stopped a few feet away, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. Barron pushed off the column, standing a little straighter. The silence stretched. Then the words came. "We're unable to verify your identity through the system." A sentence, so simple, so absurd. Barron blinked once, processing. "What?" The supervisor didn't repeat himself. Instead, he followed up with, "Do you have another form of identification?" Barron's jaw tensed. He wasn't a kid who had snuck onto the wrong flight. He wasn't using a fake ticket. This wasn't an issue. It was an excuse. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the steel behind it. "My passport is in my carry-on bag." His eyes locked onto the supervisor's. "You didn't even check it." For a fraction of a second, just a blink, the man hesitated. Barron saw it, the crack in his certainty. But just as quickly, the mask was back. "We'll need you to present it now." No explanation, No apology, just another demand. And this time, Barron wasn't the only one who noticed. A nearby passenger let out an exasperated laugh, shaking his head. A woman, a few feet away, muttered, "Unbelievable." The energy had shifted again. The tension was no longer just between Barron and the airline staff. Now the crowd was part of it too. The tide was turning, and the storm? It was just getting started. For the first time since this ordeal had begun, the supervisor hesitated. A flicker of uncertainty flashed across his face. Brief, but there. Because Barron was right. Because the logic was airtight. But rather than acknowledging it, rather than backing down, the man doubled down. "Sir, this isn't just about ID." His voice was firm, but there was a subtle strain beneath it. "There are procedures we need to follow." Barron's patience was wearing thin, but his composure didn't crack. Not yet. Procedures? His tone was steady, but there was no mistaking the disbelief simmering beneath it. "What procedures? I've flown through this airport dozens of times without an issue." The words hung in the air. For a brief second there was silence. Then the gate agent from earlier spoke up. "We've had some irregularities lately." The words were smooth, rehearsed. "You're not being singled out." But the look in his eyes, that told a different story. And Barron wasn't the only one who noticed. A murmur spread through the nearby passengers, a shifting of weight, a quiet exchange of glances. People were watching, people were questioning. A woman in her late 40s, balancing a toddler on her hip, finally broke the tension. Her voice was clear, carrying over the low hum of conversation. "What's the problem? He's just a kid with a ticket. Let him board." Barron didn't move, didn't speak. He just waited to see if the supervisor would acknowledge the woman, to see if there was even a hint of hesitation in his stance. There wasn't. The man didn't even glance her way. His focus was locked on Barron. "You'll need to wait here while we conduct a further review." Barron inhaled slowly through his nose. His grip on his carry-on tightened. This wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. This was deliberate. He could feel it in the tone, in the body language, in the way the goalposts kept shifting. "If you don't comply," the supervisor added, "we'll have to escalate the matter." Escalate. The word lingered in the air, heavier than all the others before it. A warning, a threat, and yet Barron had done nothing wrong. His voice, when it came, was controlled but sharp. Escalate. His brow furrowed, his disbelief turning to something colder. "What exactly are you escalating?" "I've done nothing wrong." But it didn't matter, because the decision had already been made. Like clockwork, as if waiting for the cue, a pair of airport security officers emerged from the side corridor. The shift in atmosphere was instant. The tension crackled, spreading out like ripples in water. Passengers whispered, some in shock, others in frustration. Phones were raised now, not just at chest level, but fully lifted, screens flashing as they recorded. Because this was a spectacle, and Barron Trump was now at the center of it. The two officers flanked him, one to his left, one to his right. Not touching him, not forcing him forward, but their presence alone spoke volumes. Barron felt his chest tighten, but not from fear, from sheer disbelief at how quickly this had spiraled. He wasn't being questioned anymore. He was being treated like a suspect. Phones flashed. A voice somewhere in the crowd. "This is insane." Another, sharper. "He's literally done nothing." But the officers remained stone-faced, unmoved by the growing unrest around them. One of them finally spoke. "Sir, please come with us." His voice was measured, as if trying to smooth over the weight of the situation. "We just need to ask you a few questions." Questions? About what? About why he was flying? About why his name was Barron Trump? The absurdity of it all churned in his stomach, but he exhaled slowly, keeping his composure intact. There was no use resisting. Not here, not now. With a sharp breath, Barron reached down, grabbed the handle of his carry-on bag, and straightened his shoulders. Fine. No argument, no scene. But the moment he stepped forward, following the officers toward a small, sterile room near the gate, he knew. This moment, it wouldn't just disappear, because the cameras had caught everything, because the world was already watching. And once the storm started, there was no stopping it.